Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my favorite books with you. I've always been an avid reader, so I'm really excited to share some of my favorite books. So let's just get into it. So my absolute favorite book is A Thousand Splendid Suns. I can't say enough good things about this book. So this book tells the story of two young women living in Afghanistan during the 1960s into the 2000s. These women end up bonding with each other as they suffer the abuse of their husband. I don't want to share too much other than that, but it's a really good book. I love this book so much. What I like about this book is the connection that the two main characters share with each other despite having different backgrounds. At first, these women were very different, but then life ends up bringing them together in a way that you couldn't ever believe. This was never the kind of book that I would go to a bookstore and pick out, but we read it for one of my classes my senior year, and I just loved this book. It's so well written and the story is so captivating yet heartbreaking at times. This book is written by the same author of The Kite Runner, but honestly I love this book way more. It's been a couple years since I reread it, so I really don't remember if there's anything that I disliked. So I guess that means it's a really good book. And I've read this book twice, so I'm itching for a third one. So overall rating on this one, 10 out of 10. I can't recommend this more. So this next one is another favorite of mine. I read this probably when I was about 14. So it's really hard to avoid a spoiler on this next one because it's pretty much in the description of the book, on the back. And everyone has probably seen the movie by now, but the next one is The Lovely Bones. And this story follows Susie Salmon, who was murdered at 14. It's a story of a teenage girl who is murdered, and she has to watch her family and her friends struggle with the grief they feel from her own heaven. Whether you believe in heaven or not, I think incorporating Susie's point of view is still important to the story. Not only is her family trying to make sense of her death, but so is Susie. She's trying to make sense of her own death and losing her life so young. This was the 70s, and stuff like this didn't happen to a small, quiet neighborhood, and this is what happened to their small, quiet neighborhood. It shows that you really can't trust everybody. And I really enjoy this book, even though it makes me cry all the time. There's not that much that I dislike about this book. I think the beginning of the book is a bit hard to read, but it's reality. And if you've already read the book, you know what I'm talking about. I'm glad they toned down that scene for the movie, even though it is the brutality of rape and murder. One part I really dislike, and it's just very nitpicky, is, spoiler, by the way, is when at the end of the book and the movie, Susie inhabits Ruth's body, and it's just so that she can get a moment with Ray. And I just feel like it's just stupid, and it doesn't make sense, and I just don't like it. I don't know. Even though you want Susie to have a happy memory, I just feel like it doesn't make sense. And it just doesn't work for me. Yes, Susie still has connections to Earth, but I just did not enjoy that scene. I just didn't understand why it needed to be there. And you can argue with me about that in the comments if you want. To each their own. So I think I've read this book 3 times at least. And overall, I'd give it a 9.5 out of 10. It's really good. I enjoy the book, obviously, if I've read it 3 times. So yeah, movie's good too. I'll say that. Okay, the next one on my list is The Help. I really need a new book because I hate movie cover books. I hate them. So The Help tells the story of black maids working in white southern homes in the 1960s. And it also follows the story of Eugenia, aka Skeeter, who is a young woman who wants to be a writer. This is another book to movie adaptation that I enjoyed. I enjoyed the book, I enjoyed the movie. I know there's a lot of people that have been pointing out how problematic the book and the movie is. And I can see why, and I will get to that soon. When I'm reading a book, I love when people intertwine their stories together in ways that you never would have expected. And that's something that I really like about The Help. The stories of the maids, especially Evelyn and Minnie, are the most fascinating parts of the book. Although I do like Skeeter's story, she's not as important as the maids to the story. Okay, so we'll talk about why it's problematic and what I dislike about the book. So the book is written by a white woman, the movie's directed by a white man, and the main character is also a white woman. So this is not the best way to learn about racism in the South and segregation. While I still love the movie and the book, I understand how it's problematic. Overall, I still love the book. There should have been more focus on the maids rather than Skeeter's story. But I've still read it 2 or 3 times, and overall, I'm still gonna give it a 9 out of 10 because I love the storyline, I love the characters. So, this next book is a new one that I read this year, and it's The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I loved this book so much. So this tells the story of a reclusive Hollywood actress from the 50s, that glamorous movie star that you imagine. And she offers this, unknown writer, Monique, who's the main character, main point of view. She offers her the opportunity to write her life story that she's never given to anybody. And this story follows her 7 husbands, and it goes in a way that you would not expect. What I like about this book is that Evelyn's story is just unexpected. I never predicted it to go the way that it did. And I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to get too into it. The beginning started out as your typical old Hollywood, do what you can to get where you're at kind of book. And then it changed into something more complex and wonderful, and I loved it. Reid's writing paints Evelyn's story so elegantly, and the pace of this book, it just flies by. Like, I could have devoured it in one sitting. It was so good. Although Evelyn is a complicated woman, you still feel a connection to her, and you want to know more about her. Monique's parts are a bit dull and uninteresting to me in comparison to Evelyn's story. While I wasn't that surprised about Evelyn's connection to Monique, if you've read the book, then you'll understand what I'm talking about, but I feel like it wasn't really that necessary to the plot. We probably could have walked away without knowing Evelyn's true motivations, and it would be true to her character as well. I was in such a slump before reading this book, and I just fell in love with it, and it's really gotten me reading more lately. I've only read this one time, so for now I'm going to rate it as a 9.5 out of 10. They're awesome. So this next book is much different than the other ones on the list. This is the collaborative autobiography of the members of Motleycrue. It follows nikkisixx, Vince Neil, Mick Mars, and Tommy Lee in their careers in the band of Motleycrue. It tells the story of their rise and their downfall, and I think it's so interesting whether you're a Motleycrue fan or not. It's not as up to date because this was written in 2001, but it's still a good read. What I like about this story is how each chapter reflects the voice of that member of the band. So a nikkisixx chapter is not going to be the same as a Mick Mars chapter. This story is the classic sex, drugs, rock and roll, but the way they tell their story makes it so much more interesting than that. While this band is full of degenerates who did a bunch of shitty things, the way that the story is told, you almost feel sorry for them and you want to root for their success. Neil Strauss, who is the main writer for this, did an amazing job telling their story. There's not much I dislike about the writing or the style of the book. However, this was the 80s and rock stars were never saints back then. At times, their recollections of events can be off-putting and problematic. But overall, there isn't much about the pace of the writing about this book that I didn't like. I've only read this book once, but I'd like to read it again, so I'm going to rate it a 9 out of 10. We've got to do a very honorable mention to the series that started it all, the Twilight Saga. I was a Twilight kid in middle school. I was obsessed with the series, with the movies. Like, I was walking around with my Twilight sweatshirt like every day. It was embarrassing, honestly, now that I look back at it. But I'm including the series because it really kickstarted like my love for reading. I recently reread the series for the first time in like a decade last year, and I was surprised at how much I still liked it. After midnightsun came out, which is a great book, I had to go back and read the whole series again. They are what they are. You know what you're getting into. This isn't Shakespeare, but it's still awesome to read. You're getting a slightly problematic love story with a vampire and a human and a werewolf. What more could you want? It's so cheesy and bad, but it's so good at the same time. Like, I am so nostalgic for this book series. Let's start with Twilight. I love this book. It's the book that started it all. It's a classic. I love this book more than the movie because there's so much more to Edward and Bella's relationship and how they progress. They progress from enemies to friends to being madly in love with each other. Okay. This was a lot of fun for me to reread this, especially after midnightsun and seeing Edward's perspective. Next up, we got Newmoon. I love this book. I have the most nostalgia for this book and movie because that was like my peak Twilight years. I think this book is super underrated. I understand that, you know, Edward's not in it, but pre-Wolf Jacob is adorable and we love him only for that time period. I loved Bella and Jacob's friendship before he became a werewolf and became a possessive jerk. It needs more Edward, but overall, I love this book. Eclipse. I found that as I got older, I like this book and movie more than I used to. I feel like there's much more going on story-wise with the newborn vampire army and with Edward and Bella's relationship. Even the weird love triangle between Edward, Bella, and Jacob was kind of interesting to me. And honestly, the book might be my favorite of the whole saga. Breaking Dawn. I don't know if you guys were around in 2008, but when this dropped, I was at the midnight release. But honestly, this is probably my least favorite of the whole series. I feel like not much happens in the story, and especially at the very last part of the novel, which is probably why they had to include that scene, we all know, because nothing happens. It could have been so much more than it was, so And midnightsun, this is brand new, this just came out last year. We've been wanting this for years. Thank you, Stephaniemeyer. I love this. I loved getting Edward's moody, emo boy perspective. So overall, the whole series, I'm gonna rate it an 8 out of 10 because I still love it. It's not the best series ever, but I still have so much nostalgia for it, So those are some of my favorite books. I hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you some incentive to get some reading done. I had a lot of fun talking about my favorite books and I hope to do more videos like this. So make sure you like and subscribe and follow me on social media. So I'll see you next time. Moving on. Let's wait for this truck to go by because we're doing this outside today. I'm sweating, but we're gonna be one with nature.